Hello, I'm Marcus Wilshere. I'm an architect, town planner with IBI Group, and I specialise in master planning and regeneration. IBI Group is a design and technology business. Our headquarters is actually in Toronto in Canada, so it brings a certain amount of international perspective. And I'm going to start by just putting my presentation in context of towns and cities and where we think they're heading. So in the first column on the left, we've got, I suppose, something we've moved away from, the idea of the functionally zoned town where homes and workplaces are all split apart. I think most people have now embraced the idea of a mixed-use place where different functions are brought together, make more diverse places. But where we're heading is, I think, a place which aren't only mixed use, but they're multifunctioning, where same spaces might have different functions at different times, and where the impact and power of technology is overlaid with the spatial layout of places to actually allow them to be working in much more sophisticated and complex sets of arrangements. And so because of that, my take on infrastructure is actually a very broad one. Just about everything comes into infrastructure in one way or another, and hopefully we'll be able to discuss some of that. I think the point to make there is plenty of evidence about how the environment impacts on people's health. There's no shortage of it. The shortage is how that could be linked to policy and actually to design approaches and to make change. So what we're finding is that for a whole variety of reasons, we're making places in too many instances that actually make us sick. So the next time someone says, I'm sick of this place, well, they might be speaking a bit more literally than they imagine. Places that don't encourage people to exercise, not because they're not going to the gym, but as part of their daily routine, because that's what they need to do. Going to the gym once a week probably isn't going to do it. It requires people to do it as part of their daily routine. But if it's easier to go around by car, you're not going to be walking, you're not going to be cycling, you're not going to have that active mobility. If you haven't got access to open spaces and nature, well, we've just heard about the power of that, not just for health, but about people's psychological well-being as well. And mental health should be given equal weight as physical health throughout all of these factors. Simple things that town planning started out with in the 19th century is bemoaning the quality of light and air and water in our cities still is a problem, particularly air pollution. Access to fresh food. If it's easier to go to a takeaway store than it is to get fresh food, then no wonder we've got a growing problem of childhood obesity. But also issues about how we put places together that make it harder for people to establish social networks. Socially cohesive places where people know their neighbours, where people can actually grow in a place, put down roots and actually get to know people is incredibly important for both their psychological health and well-being. Poor housing, we're still paying out as a country a fortune in payments to people but to compensate them because they're being forced to live in rubbish housing that doesn't meet modern standards. And environments which are disorientating and confusing for people, when we've got a growing problem of dementia, these are major issues in terms of the way we make places. And finally, but it's every bit as important, we've had decades now of increasingly centralized healthcare provision. That is breaking down, as we've already heard. There are significant problems around whether the NHS can sustain that model, and what do we do, and what are the alternatives. So in our little diagram there, we've just tried to relate health issues with the people and the demographics and the sorts of scales of places. So that's one way that we use to structure and organize information. And another little tool is this little spider chart, which we just use to compare ideas and compare places. And basically what it tries to do is to distill out the fundamentals of what we're trying to get to, but put it from the citizen's perspective. So rather than the healthcare provider's perspective or the local council's perspective, what does it mean to the citizen? And they're healthy if they can have an active lifestyle, active in both mind and body, very important. so they're stimulated. But that needs to be sustained. You can't have the output without the input. You've got to have good food, nutrition, you've got to have air and water. And how to be independent. We want people to have independent lives. We need to be able to support people so they can age in place, so that they still relate to the networks of friends and family. They're not taken away from those when we need to provide them with additional care and support. And the last thing we want to do is be bundling up our older people and putting them into some sort of grey ghetto where the only other people they see are other old people. But that has to be supported. They have to be supported through efficient and effective health and social care regimes. And how is that going to happen? But also, I've also included their spiritual support and their financial and economic support as well. So seeing these things from the point of view of the citizen, and how do we make empowered citizens within this process? Again, I won't go through the whole detail of this, but I think it's about creating a holistic overview about how the citizen fits within the future city and their place within that and the infrastructure that they need to support them. And it raises a question. I think the idea of a new paradigm has already been raised, and I think let's pursue that a bit more. We are at the point where we now have the sorts of assistive technologies which would allow more people to be treated and monitored at home, which could be immensely powerful for people in terms of the quality of support they get, their quality of life, because they're not taken away from their friends and family, but also for the efficiency that can mean for healthcare providers. Those technologies are out there already, and in many places they're actually already being started to be implemented. We could see a transformation from being a bed in a hospital to being your own bed in your own home. And the technologies that allow someone with a chronic or long-term condition to actually still be supported within that much more friendly and familiar environment. I think that'll be a growing trend, and one that we need to think about when we talk about infrastructure, to actually provide for the technology that goes in terms of the way that new homes are kitted out and the sort of infrastructure that we build into communities. So I'm going to round this out with one case study, which is a project which we're currently working on. So this is work in progress. We by no means have all the answers yet. But one of the reasons I chose this was, I think when people talk about green infrastructure and healthy environments, perhaps in the back of their mind they're thinking about leafy suburbia, because it's very easy to think in a parkland setting about how that can be healthy. But the pressures on local authorities up and down the country, but particularly around London and the South East, from market pressures, from planning policy, and simply from the shortage of appropriate land for development, means that densities are being driven up. So can we make healthy places at high densities? That's going to be the real challenge for our societies. If we can do that, then I think we've actually got a real chance of making places that are both viable, can be delivered, will meet our wider social needs and our individual needs as citizens. This is an area in Southend in Essex, and you've got the town centre and a big shopping centre and a mainline railway station, and you've got to the right, you've got the sort of suburban hinterland of typical sort of two-storey housing you get in many towns around the country. And right at the intersection between the two, they're divided by this huge bit of post-war highway infrastructure. It's a monster. So this is about the worst bit of road I've ever seen, actually. And they've also got some nice big post-war housing towers there, which are at the end of their life, and they need to come down and be replaced. So this is a close-up. You can see what this means to this community. It's not just the movement severance that this creates, that you can't get across it, although it's an absolute nightmare for pedestrians. There's a pedestrian bridge through all of this, but actually people prefer to take their life in their hands and run across the roundabout rather than go down it. But actually, there's issues of noise pollution continuously, 24/7. And there's issues of terrible atmospheric pollution. I mean, people who live around here cannot leave their windows open without getting a build-up of black dust on their furniture, because this is coming from this road. The result of that stress, illness, isolation, lack of exercise, all the things that I've been talking about. So what can we do about that? Well, I think it needed a really radical approach. So that's what we're talking about as a future vision for this area of what it might be like, where we basically deck over a big piece of that road infrastructure. We reclaim it back as public space. We green it. We get development around it, and we make it a pedestrian priority space where cars come in only when they're required for servicing function and access. That means pretty radical sort of engineering. So that's the sort of sections we're talking about. So this is the road. We build across that. We put development around it, and we try to tame that. We're talking about something in the order of about 1,200, 1,300 new homes, 3,000 square meters of other uses, local shops, community spaces, but fundamentally restructuring the area so that we create walking routes through this, so that it's good for the pedestrian to get from the residential hinterland in the top right into the town centre in the bottom left, with clear, legible routes that you can walk across this, where we manage car and traffic to access this only as needed, and we create opportunities for play and a green space throughout the scheme. And this is just an early visualization. Again, very early days on this, but this is one way it might be structured. And just one factor that we've tried to build into this. We wanted to make sure that everyone had access to external open space more than had been typical for this sort of high density development. So we've aimed for roughly double what you'd normally expect, an average of about 10 square meters per unit, more for the big family units, slightly less for the one bedrooms. But everyone has access both to balconies and roof terraces and communal spaces. And what we wanted to do as an objective for that is to say there should be an opportunity for people to grow things, not just to be able to stand out in the open or hang their washing out, but actually to be able to grow things. So we have planter areas that we're talking about where you can grow things, so you can grow vegetables and grow food. It's a modest thing, it's a small scale thing, but I think we work on the basis that every bit helps. We also have rainwater harvesting we're talking about, so we can have irrigation from that, from recycling that sort of water. So we make a place that has a series of accessible green spaces throughout. And then again, very early visualization. I think the foreground of this, we want to have something a lot greener and softer than this suggests. But thinking about things like light, getting into flats, no north-facing single aspect apartments, so everyone gets at least a bit of sunlight for part of the day. But also thinking, well, actually with climate change, actually too much heat is actually going to maybe become more of a problem than actually heat loss. So actually, how do we break down too much penetrating sunlight? One of the things which this visualization doesn't yet show, but we're exploring is, can we even grow plants up the skins of buildings and use the plants to filter light and control the amount of light, but also use the plants to filter air so that we get a double benefit from it and use those types of things. So those are the sorts of ideas that are being explored and many others, I think, to make a healthier place. We think it can be done at those sorts of high densities. It's not just a suburban issue or a suburban solution. Thank you very much.